So, allow me to invite you back in our room. We're about to start the next panel. And it is called The Green Transition and Artificial Intelligence, Friend or Foe. And I see that we are doing a tour over different policy issues which went from the policy that shall not be named, industrial policy, to the policy domain that few people knew anything about, and if they knew something about, thought it might not be that exciting, standard setting, and we just realized that is wrong, to the policy domain that most people have an opinion about, even though they might not know what they're talking about, and that is artificial intelligence. So I'm very, very happy to have Lynn Kaack start us off in this discussion. Lynn Kaack is Assistant Professor of Computer Science and Public Policy here at the Hertie School. And the title hides that she's also passionate about the role of of machine learning for climate mitigation, which she's worked on, I believe, her entire life. She joined us at the Hertie School with an engineering and physics background after having been at ETH Zurich and with a PhD from Carnegie Mellon University. She's also the co-founder of Climate Change AI, an organization to facilitate work at the intersection of machine learning and climate change. Lynn will get us started off with the collaborative work she has published and all the knowledge she has about that intersection between climate change and artificial intelligence, and then I will call the other panel speakers up on stage, the other panel speaker in the room up on stage, and the others who are online as well, and I will present them when we sit down. But first up, Lynn Kaack.
Thank you. So, am I loud enough like this? I think that's good. Yeah, I haven't worked on this my entire life, but since my PhD, so around 2018 maybe I started working on this intersection. Yeah, so I wanted to use these 20 minutes to talk a bit about how we can actually estimate the greenhouse gas emissions impact from machine learning mostly. I'm using AI sort of as a synonym, but I know that AI encompasses more than just machine learning, but machine learning is really the area that we most pay attention to recently because it's the fast developing area of AI. And then I also go a bit into details about how governments and policymakers can address this intersection of AI and climate change. So the session is called The Green Transition and Artificial Intelligence, Friend or Foe. And that's actually a discussion that has been ongoing for some time now. We published, together with colleagues, I published a paper in 2019 where we showcased how machine learning can be used to address climate change. This has been picked up by the media quite a bit. So there was this positive note, like AI can help us to fight climate change. At the same time, Emma Strubel published a paper that showed that AI has quite large emissions from the computational side. So there was the story, okay, AI is actually quite bad for the climate. People have asked this question, is it a help or hindrance to climate change? Quite a bit. And more recently also, we see more nuanced voices of can we actually estimate what is the true impact of AI? So together with Emma Strubel, some colleagues of mine and I, we ask ourselves the question, is it the right question to address, friend or foe? Or how should we go about this? Because this really assumes that we could turn AI off, but it's a technology that's already there. Lots of industries are using AI. It's a huge dynamics behind AI as well. So it's not really the question, is it bad or good for the climate? The question is more, what are the impacts and can we make it our friend? So we got together to write a paper where we illustrate or we showcase a framework how one can think about the emissions from and with AI. And we also illustrate avenues for shaping AI into a way that it can help us with addressing climate change. So I wanted to start us off by illustrating in a simplified way our framework. how to think about the emissions from machine learning and with machine learning. So as I already said, there are emissions associated with the computational side. So machine learning are algorithms, they run on servers and they consume energy. And then there's also the emissions that are associated with the hardware. Then we're using machine learning to do something. So we have applications that help us with climate change mitigation, but we also have applications that increase emissions. And lastly, through its use in the economy, it's changing, it has larger scale dynamics, and it's changing which technologies we use, what's our behavior. So we have these system level impacts of AI as well that can have effects on emissions ultimately. So starting off with this computational side of energy consumption and emissions, I wanted to show you a plot from a recent paper of Dodge et al. And they showed the energy consumption or the greenhouse gas emissions of different machine learning models in their training phase. And you can see on the right here are actually the comparisons to typical activities, emissions of typical activities. So we have the largest model here with 6 billion parameters, which uses as much, or emits as much CO2 as powering a typical home for a year when you train it. This is training from scratch. Then this graph also shows what happens if you use a model that's already trained and you adapt it to your task. And that's something that's done mostly in practice. You much rarer train something from scratch. You typically adapt something. So this is the task of fine-tuning. This is what is called a natural language processing model called BERT. And here we're talking about the emissions that are less than burning a gallon of gasoline. So already much less activity of fine-tuning. So you see, it really matters what am I doing in AIs. It's not all the same kind of thing. The other thing that this plot also shows, size matters. This is all the same model, but with different numbers of parameters. It goes from tiny to huge here. So if we reduce the number of parameters, we might compromise performance a bit, but we actually reduce the energy consumed during training quite a bit. So this is a picture you see talked about a lot, what happens during training for typical models. But the picture is actually much wider and much more complex. So what this plot addressed were the operational emissions from energy consumed during the computation. So these depend on how efficient the data center is, of course, and on the algorithm-specific things that I just mentioned. And we can improve these by having more efficient compute, having better cooling, or making use of the waste heat. But it also depends on what kind of energy am I using. Am I powering my data center with renewable energy? And in particular, data centers also have this ability to provide flexible demand, which can help to integrate more renewables into the grid, and therefore they could also contribute in that way. But the other side of the picture are these so-called embodied emissions. So these emissions are from the production and the end of life of the hardware, and they arise from mining, from producing the good, from transportation, and from disposal and recycling of those servers, for example. And you can see on the last picture here, of course, greenhouse gas emissions is not the only problem. We also have other environmental impacts and social impacts connected to this infrastructure. So this is the picture from the infrastructure that the AI is running on, but we also included in our paper a framework how to think about the algorithms and the activities of these algorithms. And what we wanted to illustrate here is what the use phase of a machine learning algorithm or neural network-based machine learning algorithm looks like. And we now, in this typical plot, we talked about the training of an algorithm. But then there's also the development, which is training a model, sometimes thousands several thousand times to come up with the right architecture that is achieving the best performance. So in the research and development phase, we actually need a lot of energy to build this model, but then typically the parameters are rather stable, so we don't do that often. That's what we indicate by the frequency here. Then instead, inference refers to using the model. So I have a picture, I input the picture to my model, I get there's a cat or a dog in the picture, or I make a prompt to ChatGPT, for example. This is inference. That consumes much less energy, but for certain types of models, this is done a lot, billion times a day sometimes. And actually, what many don't realize is that the inference phase can sometimes be the real problem. So Google and Facebook, for example, they report that the larger fraction of their machine learning related energy consumption comes from inference. So this is looking at a single model, but we may also ask the other way around, like what is the overall consumption of AI globally, ideally? Spoiler, we don't know, but a way to think about this is we know sort of what's the fraction of the information communication technology sector. These numbers are very uncertain, so it's a few percent. Every study has a bit of a different picture here. This is the number that my co-author trusted most in 2020. There's also a dynamic behind that. So currently, this fraction stay kind of flat, but this might also change, and we might actually have much higher fractions of ICT-related greenhouse gas emissions in the future. But what fraction of that is AI-related is really difficult to estimate. So this blue shaded area is sort of a really, really rough guess based on what kind of infrastructure AI may run on. But what we really need to know here is from data center operators, what is the share of machine learning related activities on their servers, at least having a rough estimate, and how is that changing over time? Like, are we running into a real problem here, or is that actually something that is still a rather small fraction and most of it is sending pictures and videos? So this is still a bit unclear, and it's something that policymakers could help with understanding. So next I wanted to shift to using those machine learning algorithms, both for good and for bad, essentially. I wanted to show you some examples of how one can use machine learning in climate change mitigation and adaptation. It would be way too long to go through all of the different areas here, but some examples that I've come across recently from practice are, for example, train operators like the Deutsche Bahn. They use machine learning or experimenting with it, for example, for increasing their reliability and making it more cost competitive by incorporating it in predictive maintenance activities. So identifying failures, for example, before they occur. AI is very helpful. Then you can use AI to design better batteries, also other renewable energy technologies. So this is an example from AI Ionics that use machine learning to speed up their experimental processes to design better batteries. Then you can use it for adaptation purposes. So understanding better the consequences of climate change. For example, here it's used by Kuzi to predict locust outbreaks. So predicting large-scale crop failures is a task that AI is being used for frequently. And this last example here is from Austria. Infrared is a project where researchers, they use AI to speed up the simulation of how wind flows through newly designed districts. And that really helps them to understand is it a walkable city, what are the effects on the energy consumption in buildings. And these simulations usually take days sometimes, or hours or days. And with machine learning, you can approximate them and speed them up significantly, like less than second speed. So it actually helps you design better districts. So in our paper, we provided some structure on what's the role of machine learning for climate change mitigation, and what are the potential levers, how it has an effect on emissions. And I'm not going to go into details in the interest of time, but just to put it out there that we try to make an effort to structure it. And we also here indicate it can definitely be used to accelerate emissions-intensive activities and therefore also increase emissions. So for example, it's used heavily in the oil and gas sector. Yeah, and the last aspect of the system-level impacts I wanted to illustrate by just showing you the entire framework that we developed here. So from the inside to the outside, you realize that we have here the computing-related impacts that are talked about. Then we have the application in all different kinds of sectors that can have positive and negative effects. And then lastly, those trickle down to the rest of the economy and have actually system-level effects. And what I mean by that is, for example, rebound effects. I use AI to increase efficiency. That saves us money. We use the money again to emit more CO2 by either consuming more of the same good or by spending it elsewhere to emit more CO2 emissions. Or lock-in and path dependency. We talked a lot about technology. AI may change the way that technologies become market-ready and change also the way that we introduce those low-carbon technologies, or even have carbon lock-in where we stay with high-carbon technologies due to changing competitiveness, maybe with AI. AI is heavily used in advertising, so it can change consumer behavior. Which again comes with emissions changes potentially. It's used in communication and education. It influences how people think. There are definitely ways that AI can change emissions. And those at first sight don't have anything to do with sustainability or the climate. So what can policymakers do? And just to note that general climate policies, of course, also have an effect on AI. So we don't only need like technology-specific ideas here. So carbon pricing would definitely change the way AI is used. But there are also some specific things. So we should foster applications in the area of climate change mitigation by funding them, for example. We should require transparency and accountability in cases where AI could increase emissions. And we should take, when we look at AI, we should think about the climate. So we should have this climate-focused lens when evaluating AI technologies. And while writing the paper, we also wrote a policy report with a global partnership on AI on these issues. So lots of the policy recommendations also are detailed there. And we included like a for example, this central figure where we also provide an overview of policy approaches in particular to foster AI applications in this area. Don't have a lot of time, but we need better data and data infrastructure. We need research funding, and we need to think about how can we help those AI integrate with existing systems, especially since much of climate change and energy has to do with critical infrastructure. And there we have security requirements on, or safety requirements on AI that we need to respect. So there's a lot of things from the regulatory side also that one needs to pay attention to. And then on transparency, just to mention, there are tools that help you estimate the energy consumption from the algorithm. There are times even kind of small pieces of code that you can use at the micro level, essentially. But then, of course, we also need to have the macro level to understand in data centers what are the dynamics, how much machine learning is running there, what's the energy consumption, how it's changing over time. We need to get to a point where we actually have the ability to perform full life cycle analysis of AI systems. Currently, we're still in the not ready to do so yet, but and this should also include the embodied emissions from the hardware and the application impacts. And especially those application impacts, as I mentioned, are potentially pretty large, and they're more difficult to estimate. So here it's important to still try to estimate them, even if qualitatively. And there are already quite some government initiatives. So the EU is looking really into this area. Germany has a program on AI and climate. The US has different initiatives. And Austria, for example, also has a program. So there exist initiatives. And I think the most important one to pay attention to right now is the AI Act, where in 2021 I wrote together with colleagues a feedback to the legislation, where we argued that mainly two things. We need to include climate and the environment in the assessment of high risk. So far in the Commission's draft, the legislation only had the risk to health, safety, and fundamental rights. But we argued the environment and climate change need to be included here as well to warrant an algorithm to be considered as high risk. And I think this is my last slide. So, and the other point is, okay, where we have already reporting in place in this legislation, which is true, for example, for high-risk systems, why not also report on the energy consumption and on the application-related potential impacts of those systems? And now the Parliament has voted this month on their amendments to the legislation, which now include those recommendations, which is great. So we should all stay tuned what happens in the negotiations, but I was really happy to see that. I did provide some input on the way there, but I think many people fought for this to make its way into the legislation. And thanks, that's it, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. May I call with Lynn on stage also Stefanie Kunkel. Thought there was an issue. And we have two people who are joining us online. And I'll just turn this so I can see what's happening online. If everything is working well, then we should have Lynn Fung with us online as well. I see you on the small screen. I hope we get to see you on the big screen. And we have Mollen also online, who I also see. We're waiting for the big screen so the audience can see you. And to Mollen in particular, thank you very much for jumping in at a very late stage. I think you had possibly a day to prepare, and we're very happy you're all with us. Let me present the panel to the audience. Apart from Lynn Kaack, who's now sitting with us, Lynn Fung is the chair and co-founder of the People-Centered Internet, an NGO founded in 2018 to ensure that individuals and communities realize the benefits of digital tools in an open and resilient way. With a career in the private sector, including at Intel, Shell, and Oracle, she became deeply involved in shaping the future of digital cooperation and innovation through alliances and work with institutions such as the World Economic Forum, the World Bank, the United Nations, among many others. Thank you for being with us online today. Stefanie Kunkel is a scientist at the Research Institute for Sustainability, the Helmholtz Center in Potsdam. She has joined the RIFS in 2019 to work in a project called Digitalization and its impact on sustainability, so right on the topic we're discussing today. And this project explores the impact on digitalization on sustainable value creation, and in particular with a focus on the global south. And Mollen, who's also online, is a senior research associate at AlgorithmWatch, and she focuses on algorithmic decision makings and sustainability, as well as its impact on the future of work and the public sector. She holds a PhD from the University of Bremen on digital democracy and has research expertise, has a research experience at the University of Münster. Thank you very much for joining us as well. So to get us started in the discussion today, let me maybe start with Mei-Lin Fung and ask you, what are the main opportunities you see to use machine learning and other information technologies to promote climate change mitigation and adaptation? So we said in the beginning there was a lot of hope that this would be a big solution before people got more critical. Can you tell us more about the solution part and what your greatest hope still is?
I am glad to be here. Can you hear me?
Yes, very well.
Okay, good. I happen to be very connected to Germany because I'm a Hasso-Plattner Institute fellow. And there at the Hasso-Plattner Institute, there is a lot of research into the energy efficient use of computing. But the opportunities really for me lie in the potential of the circular economy. But we need AI and machine learning for us to understand how to reuse, recycle, and manage better the resources we already have in play so that we can not have to mine new resources, but can make sure that those are efficiently used. I particularly think that Germany and the EU have a role to play, particularly because of the tech giant of Europe, SAP. SAP contains 80% of the world's supply chain data. If we are to have circular economy, we actually need to know where things are going, where things are being used, and how we might reuse it. So unfortunately, sort of data protection and things like that mean it's difficult to use that data to understand how to better operate a circular economy or what the opportunities are. So I want to say that that's the biggest opportunity in circular economy. The second one is impact tracking, tracking longitudinal impact, inputs, outputs, outcomes, and impact. All of that requires digital tracking. And we do not do that very well today. So we don't use our resources well to get the impact that we want. We could optimize our impact production by understanding how the inputs actually deliver impact. Thank you.
Thank you very much for a first set of answers. I'm sure we'll get back to some of these questions, but since we looked at the promises, let's look at the pitfalls. And I would like to turn to Anna Mols and ask, what are the risks that can appear and what can be done better to use these technologies without falling into the traps?
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation and the question. Well, there's a lot to look out for. I think raising awareness for the sustainability costs of artificial intelligence is the first essential step, because still the technology itself is often considered as being this magical tool which has no environmental or social impact. So raising awareness for the issue is important. At the same time, it is important to come to a really nuanced discussion. And I think this was portrayed very well in Lynn's presentation. Not all machine learning models have a huge resource consumption, but many do. And we need to understand when they are really resource intensive and when they are not, and how we can shift them to become more efficient. And this is especially important if we also consider how AI systems can be used for climate mitigation efforts, because we really need to come to this life cycle assessment and understand their whole life cycle impact to really kind of evaluate the long-term impact that technology might have. And what we see amongst policymakers especially is that AI technologies are being hailed as the one-size-fits-all solution to really complex societal problems like the energy and mobility transformation that is necessary. But we don't have the detailed analysis that we would need to understand where they can really make an impact and where they might not be as efficient. So we really have to understand a lot more, and we have to overcome these really broad claims made by policymakers, what the technology can achieve for climate change.
So we have two questions that we still know too little about: when specific models might make an impact and how, and the other is then also how much they consume and what we can do to affect that positively. So a question for Stefanie. We know about the extremely intensive energy consumption of some models, and we now see it's not that simple. So Lynn said, how can we use AI to become a friend of ours, because it's not going to go away? How far is this question research, and how advanced are we in finding out what to do about AI most effectively?
Thanks. I would make a more controversial statement. I'm quite pessimistic about the impact of AI for the climate, and there are several reasons why. I think the first reason is that the efficiencies that we're talking about that can be enhanced and increased by AI are the same in both the more environmentally destructive sectors and in the less destructive, maybe even positive sectors. So there's no reason a priori why AI should really help us more in those areas like circular economy and energy than in, let's say, fossil fuel exploitation. And the second point is that I believe that many of the applications that we're now talking about, where I could have an impact, I don't think they are really effective. For example, when we look at the monitoring of certain environmental impacts, we may know more about what is happening, to what extent we're emitting in this and that sector, but it doesn't help us to reduce these emissions. And I'm really looking hard for these examples, but I see really few examples in my research in industry. So we're looking at digital technologies in industry, where the story is really compelling and credible, that AI is going to absolutely reduce emissions. It's all about efficiencies, and I think this links to Lynn's point about the system level impacts, because we're focusing on emissions in the training of AI, which may be a fraction of the emissions and the overall environmental impacts that we see at the system level. When we increase consumption through targeted advertisement, when we exploit fossil fuels at a higher efficiency, making it more cost efficient and raising the bar of competitiveness for renewable energies, among others. And the last point that makes me a bit pessimistic is that we're now focusing so much on energy and emissions, and Lynn has also brought this up. There's so many other environmental impacts that we could be talking about, and I admit that it's quite difficult to ask an ML researcher, what is the biodiversity impact of your research? But it's questions that we need to ask, because even if we reduced emissions, maybe there's a growing problem in the backyard, but many other environmental indicators such as resources extraction, and just as a last point, there is some research that says we're actually reaching some other planetary boundaries at higher speed, for instance, toxicity, waste. So I think these are questions that we need to address much more.
Thank you very much for the very clear statement that, of course, is a bit of a downer, but I think very useful to say. I think, let me summarize when the question, friend or foe, that already Lynn didn't like, you're answering, at best, it's possibly irrelevant. At worst, it's just speeding up everything at the same time and gets our attention away from the things that really matter, which might be the other boundaries. So I would like to give the floor back to Lynn. The question I had for you were the policy approaches that you had very much in the last slide, and maybe if you would like to reflect some of the things that were said and some of the pessimism, what do you think really needs to be the focus of the policy design questions that are currently in the different legislations or the initiatives you were pointing to?
Yeah, so I still think it's really valuable strategy or like aim to assist AI driven technologies in different sectors to address climate change. Because we do see a lot of examples that are promising. For example, modern power systems, power system operators, they say they see very little future without AI. So they're really looking strongly into AI, especially as power systems get more complex with more renewables, more flexible loads. You really need this kind of forecasting capabilities that AI brings in these systems. Same goes for so-called smart controlling of systems such as large-scale heating and cooling and ventilation systems. Here AI has a big role to play. So there are really lots of application areas where it does play an important role. And we can do a lot, I mean, policymakers can do a lot to help those companies start deploying those kind of solutions. And we have lots of barriers here. We have institutional barriers, we have missing infrastructure, digital infrastructure in those places. Access to high-skilled labor is also a constraint for many, especially smaller companies. And just kind of business models around this, right? It's not straightforward to start an AI-based project currently, as far as I understand. So you don't know where, like many players in the energy sector, for example, don't know where to go to if they want to get helped on this. And so we need to sort of help shape this ecosystem and also create players that are trusted and that they will support these companies with those systems on the long run. So don't just go out, build a solution, and then go away, and the company is there with a model that gets outdated in half a year. And so it's really, you need to have partnerships or setups that work on the long run. So I think that's really important. Then on the side of trying to require transparency, I think it's important to understand where AI is being used for emission-intensive activities or increasing emissions, but there's also very little one can do. You cannot forbid a industry to use AI, at least at this point. But with the current legislation, upcoming legislation, we would at least get a handle on what is happening and require those to be high-risk systems. So there is a little bit, with the AI Act, there's some step towards more transparency here and more visibility of those areas. And then, of course, if we look at the computing-related consumption, I already mentioned several approaches that I think are important. But what is to be realized is that if you're consuming lots of energy and lots of electricity, you're also paying for that. So very large AI models cost a lot of money. So ChatGPT, I don't know, there are different numbers floating around the internet, so I don't know how trustworthy they are, but they're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars per day, I think, just to run that system. So if we have CO2 pricing on energy, or if electricity gets more expensive, that will also have an effect on how efficient these systems are. So we don't always need to try to tune or go into the research level of ML and try to set standards for what kind of performance with what kind of energy consumption. This is really difficult because, especially in AI, this is so fast moving. You cannot really set standards, but we have tools that would be working to actually create incentives to make systems more efficient.
Thank you very much. I would like to open up, but I saw both Anne and Mei Ling react at a moment where you were mentioning the cost of this energy. Would you like to jump in for a comment? Either one of you?
I think that the cost of energy needs to be much better measured. Earlier on, we talked about what research is needed. We do not know what we think might be saving energy, whether it is in fact saving energy. So we need a great deal more research into that. Labeling both of AI for its energy use as well as AI in terms of its impact in other areas. For example, what the source of the data is. There's so much research that is required for us to make good use of AI. And then the final thing is citizen participation. We talk about it as though all of this research might be able to be done in the ivory towers, but in fact, the most important thing is how citizens make choices about their day-to-day activities and whether it involves AI or not. And they can't make informed choices without the labeling, but they also should have the opportunity to provide feedback that feeds back into research. So I believe a very important issue that has not been raised yet is that citizen participation and feedback in climate risk and climate mitigation, and the role AI could play to allow citizen participation is hugely important, but it needs to be done in an energy efficient way. And therefore, engineers should be trained to know the difference between the energy use of the alternate algorithms that they might apply within AI. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anne, did you also want to say?
Yes, and I'm going to jump on that directly because I agree that we need transparency, and we also need transparency with regards to citizens, but at the same time, it cannot be in the individual responsibility of people who are occupied with their everyday life to, be responsible for the sustainable application of AI systems. So we need this kind of regulation that the AI proposes. And we have the Parliament position right now, and it's going to trade-off. So what we are hearing from Parliament is that the Commission is not very happy with the environmental standards that are being set in the Parliament proposition now. So we need a lot of support to go forward on the environmental design standards for so-called foundation models that the Parliament has been proposing and for the reporting mechanisms. And still, the AI Act it's a market entry tool. So we need a lot more regulation on AI to really come to terms with the sustainability aspects here. And what is needed is not a focus only on the outputs, but we have to understand that sustainable AI is not only a technological problem or issue, it's an organizational issue. So we have to raise awareness how to create more sustainable AI systems. And we also have to overcome, and it has been said before here, that it's not only about energy. And we can not only, this has been a question in the chat, we cannot just transfer it to renewable energies because we don't have enough. We see data centers in Ireland competing with private households because there's not enough renewable energies. We will not get there in due time. So we have to consider how we make these systems more sustainable and more energy, less energy consuming.
Thank you very much. I would like to use the last 15 minutes to open up questions to the audience. And since you are in presence of an all-female panel, not at all by design, I will give the favor to a male question from the audience. So we're not women-splaining to you what AI will do to the environment. So if you like to jump in first, we're happy to take you. Okay, we will take Niels, and you can be in line, and we also have the audience. Okay. Yes, but somebody needs to give a microphone. Do I have... Ja, danke.
Yeah, great. Thanks so much for the great presentation. I was wondering, sort of two questions. First of all, do you have a sense of magnitude of the overall effect, whether it's positive or negative, in terms of like the gains and sort of like the increased energy use of AI, sort of like the net overall effect, and what sort of is the potential that theoretically you could put all those servers, let's say, to Iceland, and sort of where, let's say that you have a lot of renewable energy and sort of very low temperature, which might reduce the energy needed for this type of server capacity, even though sort of we just heard that might create competition with local consumers. But yeah, be very interested in that question. Thanks.
Thank you. Let me collect. I'll take one in the back, And then you'll get the mic back. I see you, but maybe if you can pass it through just to the back. And I will take the online question and yours in a second round.
Thank you very much. Ulrike Bechtel, Austrian Academy of Sciences and Institute of Technology Assessment. And I would like to thank you for the wonderful lecture. And we had a quite similar symposium in December last year. Maybe you remember, Lynn, you were part of the speakers there too. And I would like to bring in a question that was brought in by a participant back then. What the person asked, and this is also probably where we can link to participation and to involving people. What the person brought in is, okay, we have AI. There's lots of research that needs to be done still, to be able to really track down where is the impact positive and where is it negative. I think that we agree upon, but that takes time. And while we're doing this, isn't it also to some extent not quite responsible to just like, okay, there is a solution probably coming up, but while we're waiting for the solution to be really effective, the systems keep on consuming, keep on driving us as a planet into a direction that's questionable. So what the person in the end asked was, how do we make sure that someone takes over responsibility now with the knowledge we have now for the measures we know would be beneficial? And also, what role could AI play there? Thank you very much.
So let me take these two questions. I don't know if you want to react to something.
Yeah, I'll start. So I don't have an estimate of the capacity that Iceland can carry in data centers, but I would agree with Anne that we run into a problem of general increasing energy demand globally. And I think another aspect is that if we increase efficiency, if we make it cheaper and renewable energies would be cheaper, I guess, in that setting, then there will probably also be more traffic because it will be cheaper to use these models. So I think it's a cats and mouse game. And the second question related to how can we act now, I think there's already too much attention regarding the effects of the environmental effects of AI, because there's much we already know about previous ICT, information and communication technology assessments, and even technology assessment in general. And we also have a lot of measures that we can take to reduce environmental impact of innovation and generally of our businesses, but we don't do it. So I think my general recommendation would be not to lose ourselves in the discussion around the environmental impacts of AI, but look at the broader picture and see, okay, we know what we need to do, and now we need to work with the people, with governments, and convince businesses and sit together to see how we can implement the existing solutions and not search for some unrealistic future solution.
Mm-hmm. Lynn?
Can I also weigh in? So I think we still have this mindset here that there's a problem, we're using AI to solve it, and we sort of have like standard measure for how much AI is consuming, and we just need to weigh the savings that it has with the energy costs from the computational side. And I think this is a little bit removed from the reality, because most AI systems are used in advertising, recommender systems, all the online traffic. We now have those large language models or foundational models that are being used again for those same purposes, creating lots of content online, creating targeted advertising, and that has nothing to do with climate change mitigation efforts and such. So we need to actually really look at those other applications of AI, because they are the dominant applications. And here also those large models are being used. Then when it comes to those sustainability applications, they're often smaller. I mean, I'm not saying always. We can also probably use large language models in the context of climate change mitigation. But often they are actually smaller models that can be run on the Hertie server. They can be sometimes run on a laptop. We're really not talking about significant energy use here. And to slow these kind of applications, because there are larger models out there, would be a huge problem in my eyes. So we need to both look at AI as a whole, and especially at those very large scale models and the development of them, and try to constrain the energy consumption on that side. But we should not have that hamper any efforts to use it in sustainability or for other kind of social good purposes, because the models it's really apples and oranges sometimes. I mean, we're really talking about sometimes very small applications. And then the other thing is that we should also not make the mistake of confusing machine learning for digitalization. So we have lots of digital efforts that have nothing to do with machine learning. So not everything that has to do with data is AI in that sense.
Thank you very much. Anne?
Yeah, I would like to pick up on that, because we still see a lot of parallels between digitization discourses and sustainability and machine learning and sustainability. And I would really like to stress what has been said before. We know the issues, partly also because it's about hardware, and it's the same. It has been the same discussion for years now with digitization and sustainability, and we know the problem. We know that there is horrendous working conditions in the mine used, mining for resources for the hardware that is needed for digitization or machine learning processes. And there is simply, we have to state, there is a political unwillingness to address this issue. We have a Eurocentric perspective on how to regulate AI. It is supposed to be human-centric. This is what the Commission has been telling us. But it is a very Eurocentric perspective, and it is not a perspective of global justice. And we see the manifestation of global injustices in the way AI is being developed and used, and in the way it is being regulated. And I cannot stress this enough. We know we have to do analysis on how and when AI can be used, and how to weigh benefits versus risk in some specific areas. But with the underlying sustainability issues, we know the issue and we could be addressing them, but it's not happening.
Thank you very much. I'm tempted to give over to Lynn, because the global justice seems to be one of the areas you've worked a lot on, and maybe you'd like to comment as well.
I would. On the issue about doing something right away is the most important. What can be done right now? It seems far away, but government procurement, how governments buy, is really important, because often they are the largest buyer in any economy. So therefore, if, for example, the EU and North America provide leadership in government procurement requirements for digital and AI, we can require, as citizens, we demand that our governments require labeling of the energy use of the applications that are used. That labeling is not done today because nobody requires it. Just like nutrition labeling allowed ordinary people to make more informed choices simply by requiring labeling on all applications, then if ChatGPT wants to be used by the German government, they should have labeling for the energy use. And these are things that can be done. The other big part for the Global South is video. Many, many people are still not literate and do not read and write. And so video is the main way that is the communication method. We need to pay much more attention to how to do green streaming. What is the energy use of video? Today, you get different companies saying, oh, we are compressing, we're not using much energy. But in fact, our systems, our infrastructure for video are designed for peak load. So it doesn't matter whether you're using it. The actual hardware is optimized for the peak load. So we're not paying attention to exactly how to reduce energy use. And I think Lynn's research is terrific, but the fact of using percentage of energy use for ICT from 2020, that is pre-COVID. And so much digital transformation has happened. at the Hassel Planet Institute, we estimate that ICT will be 30% of all energy use. And we must today make sure that the algorithms are energy efficient so that we actually don't get up to 30%. Or if we do get that, we really understand the trade-offs we're making energy use. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me add the online question. If who has the mic currently that's going around? Okay, then let's bring in.
Thanks. And I just want to echo what Mollen said, because judging from the heat of this thing, this Zoom session could have been optimized and made more energy efficient. So the question that Brian Kahin again asked is, is about uses of AI. And in fact, he asks, could it be used to assess costs and risks of climate change with some insurance data, basically, I assume modeling also, and then understanding impacts? Is that one use that could be made of it? And since I have the mic, I'm going to add my own question or comment. All the discussion you have, I think, links back to our previous session, because it sounds a lot as if we need technical standards in order to measure the energy efficiency or CO2 emissions and other environmental impacts of AI and other digital tools, I think. Isn't that right?
Thank you very much. Can you pass the mic? I promised you'll get it back, so you have the last question, and then we'll give a lightning round set of answers from the panel.
Hello, my name is Radha, and thank you for the lovely discussion. My question is for Professor Lynn. The two sectors that are the most difficult to decarbonize, as we learned in the morning, is agriculture and construction. Does AI have any solutions specific for this sector on how we can decarbonize that? Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we have 4 minutes to go, which was exactly 1 minute per person. I will start from my left and go all the way down. Lynn, do you want to pick the items you'd like to comment on? Or?
So yeah, there were lots of questions about applications. So in terms of adaptation, so as a society adapting to a changing climate, there are quite a few applications. For example, large-scale harvest failure, remote sensing, for example, which is done. There's a program, NASA Harvest, for example. They predict large-scale failures in, I think, Uganda. They have different areas that they look at. And the area of also predicting extreme events. So climate science, essentially, has benefited hugely from AI. They run these really expensive simulations, and by using AI, they're able not only to feed in more data to their simulations, but also to speed up the simulations and to have more fine-grained, more localized predictions, and therefore understand better the extreme events. In terms of decarbonizing industry and agriculture, there are quite a few solutions that people are exploring. I mean, especially in agriculture, I wouldn't say it's anywhere near to big rollouts, but there's this area of precision agriculture where one tries to really precisely adapt fertilizer use, for example, and water use to the needs of the land. And then in industry, in those processes, there are lots of data-driven solutions also in recycling. So in the circular economy, people are using or exploring AI to understand the material properties of recycled goods, which are really sometimes very difficult to integrate and to make into new goods. So AI can actually help to understand and tailor it to the materials that are at hand in the process of recycling.
Thank you very much. Over to Stefanie Kunkel.
My final statement would be that maybe as some of you might have noticed, I would caution against this kind of techno-solutionism, and it appears in many different fields. I do research on industry, and there's people suggesting all kinds of solutions, AI solutions among others, to problems we already have solutions to. So I think it's more a problem of implementation. I agree with Lynn that the circular economy and the decarbonization of the energy sector, because we need flexible systems for renewable energies, that these are two very important fields of applications, but it shouldn't distract our attention away from the massive risks and the potential to sustain a very unsustainable system. And that's why I think, we need to focus on the solutions we already have and not let us waste another 10 years to find the perfect AI solutions, because there are other ways of going about these problems.
Thank you very much for the word of caution. Anna Mollen.
I'm trying to be quick, and I'm taking up Brian's question about the use of AI for assessing costs and risks of climate change. I'm going to be honest, I don't see the point in doing that, because we know the issue. We know that there are risks and costs and massive costs associated with climate change. So I don't think that producing new numbers and supposedly more objective numbers, because it's AI based, is going to help us in that case. But we know what we need to do to reduce the climate effects of AI systems. And I would even advocate for disconnecting the discourse about AI for climate change and the sustainability aspects of AI from each other. We always put these two together, but we should separate them and discuss them separately and find solutions in separate spaces.
Thank you very much. And the final word from Mei-Ling Fung.
We have talked about some big issues, but mostly it's big companies that are supposed to do something about this. But the majority of employment in the world comes from small, medium enterprises. How do we get the knowledge about how to operate energy efficiently to small, medium enterprises? We need to bring digital public infrastructure to small, medium enterprises. And we could make loans to small, medium enterprises contingent on them having energy labeling, doing things that are green and resilient. So we need to actually think about the future much more proactively, and we must take into account the small businesses. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And please join me in a round of applause to all the panelists and